is not a top issue. Is he making a mistake by making this such a big issue from the trail?
Well, I think this is an easy opportunity where you have folks who are maybe middle of the road, possibly undecided folks that look and see what's going on these college campuses, and it just leaves them shaking their heads. I saw a poll yesterday that came out that said 70% of Americans supported arresting these protesters. 2/3 supported sending the National Guard in if state and local and university officials won't deal with these threats to Jewish students and just good order on these campuses.
It's not specifically this. It gets to the bigger issue of crime, if you will, that Donald Trump has been hitting on so much.
Well, exactly. And I think it does resonate with folks who are across America when they see what's happening in our cities and many big cities, and they just shake their heads. You see these protests happening, and then they go on for weeks and weeks and weeks. As soon as it crosses over from that First Amendment to where we're threatening Jewish students to where we're actually shutting down operations, I think that's where the line was crossed. And the president, Biden, should have taken a stronger stance, come out more forceful on it, and even threaten to use the National Guard if local and state officials wouldn't step in and do it.
Chris, if I can, I want to shift gears now to another moment of unrest and other crimes that were committed, because Donald Trump, in the interview with Time magazine the other day, referred to people who rioted at the Capitol, the insurrectionists, as J6 patriots. And then last night, in an interview with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, was asked if he would accept the election results in 2024. And he said, if everything's honest, I'll gladly accept the results. I don't change on that. But then he also said, if it's not, you have to fight for the right of the country. You have to fight, he says, if he doesn't think the election results are honest. And we know that his bar for honesty doesn't comport with reality, since he didn't think the 2020 results were honest. So how seriously should voters take statements like this, Chris?
Well, I mean, this is not just Trump rhetoric. And the one thing, even if you look at what's happening across the college campuses and Trump's rhetoric yesterday, it is kind of ironic and rich that he's talking about a forceful response to those college campus protests, but completely ignores, his role and responsibility of the January 6th protests. If you step back and put the politics aside for a second, voters are sick and tired. I've seen this in all the research we've done over the last year, are sick and tired of this division, dysfunction, chaos, unrest across the board. And so I'm not surprised, nor should anyone be, that Trump's going to essentially talk out of both sides of his mouth. He's going to talk about a forceful response and then ignore it in other circumstances. The other part, I think, for Democrats, and I think this is the part that's key, the president has kind of missed, I think, a key opportunity here, right? To go out there and talk about these college campus protests, to talk about them, and I think in a fair, reasonable way, to paint the contrast between what a Donald Trump presidency would do and what he is doing. The idea that you're not going out there at this moment talking about this, I'm talking about the president right now, makes no strategic political sense at all. And I think it provides a vacuum that Trump is happy to fill with whatever rhetoric he's going to come up with that day.
You're talking about Biden and the unrest at colleges specifically, Chris, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the reality is when you look at what's happening, I mean, voters, especially if you look at the election, right? The election is going to be decided by kind of two dynamics: mobilizing your base and those middle undecided voters. Those middle undecided voters have a lot of questions and concerns about both candidates, right? They abhor, if you will, kind of chaos. This creates, right or wrong, the image of chaos. And in those circumstances, the President Biden, right, has to go out there and make it clear what his position is and what he believes is right and wrong in these circumstances. Not doing that, right, creates an opportunity for Trump to say, oh, I'm the adult, which is insane. But that's the problem when you create a vacuum. I do not understand it at all.
I want to go double down on and go back to the quote that John was reading, Mark, about political violence related to the coming election in 2024. Trump to the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel: if everything's honest, I'll gladly accept the results. I don't change on that. If it's not, you have to fight for the right of the country. Also, to Time magazine that we've been talking about this week, I think we're going to win. If we don't win, it depends. It always depends on the fairness of the election. People who are familiar with Donald Trump often say this is his rhetoric. After January 6th, Is there any way that it can only be that? I mean, from a comms perspective, do you want your candidate out saying this?
Well, I think what we have to understand is we're asking a political candidate, regardless of whether it's Donald Trump or Democrat, Republican, are you just going to accept at face value the results? When we've seen in state, local elections, go back to the 2000 election, if we would have asked Al Gore in April of 2000, will you accept the election results, not challenge, not go to court, not take your legal rights to have questions asked about the counting and the ballots? No one would have expected that, and then Al Gore did that.
But I get that. But Donald Trump is in a category of his own when it comes to this commentary. After January 6th, after the 2020 election, which he still does not accept the results, even though it was a fair election. After that, how can this is in a category of its own?
Well, but I don't think you can actually hold a candidate to a category of its own. They have the same legal rights, and I would say that
legal
Joe
rights
Biden,
for sure, but but I'm talking about the political violence that is not completely, that he does not completely denounce or take the opportunity to when he's asked about political violence, not just fairness of an election.
Well, I mean, we're not talking about political violence here. We're talking about accepting the results of an election.
This is what comes after the election.
And I think, obviously, we're always going to condemn political violence. I think January 6th was a horrible day. The folks who were there exercising their rights at the ellipse.
He calls them J6 patriots. He's not condemning the violence. He's calling them J6.
There were tens of thousands of people who were there at the ellipse.
He says
and then there was a small number that went to inside the Capitol.
He won't rule out pardoning all the people who are inside the Capitol, and he calls them J6 patriots. We do have to cover the breaking news that's going on in L.A. Our coverage continues right now.
This is CNN Breaking News.